Ray, this is a trip down memory lane for me.
That's right. You grew up in Newtown, Connecticut, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. The Sandy Hook section, to be exact. I fell in love with haunted history in this town. Man, I remember going to sleepovers at some friends' old houses. Houses, they say, were haunted.
Did you experience anything?
Well, we used to take out the Ouija board and try to make contact with whatever might be there, so I don't know. I'm not sure.
All right, so I guess you're going to take us to a haunt in town?
Yeah, that's the idea. And though this town has plenty of buildings that can lay claim to a ghost or two, I'm taking us to the mother of all Newtown haunts. It's just at the top of this hill.
Whoa, this place is huge.
Yeah.
It looks almost like some old college campus or
maybe a former asylum. Welcome to the haunted grounds of Fairfield Hills Hospital. Hi, I'm Jeff Belanger.
And I'm Ray Auger. Welcome to episode 134 of the New England Legends podcast. If you give us about 10 minutes, we'll give you something strange to talk about today.
And thank you for riding with us as we chronicle every single legend in New England, one story at a time.
Yes, thank you.
Each week, we bring you strange but true tales of ghosts and monsters and aliens and the just plain odd from all over the northeastern United States.
And really, we couldn't do this without the support of our Patreon patrons.
So true.
This show requires a ton of time and money each week to cover our production, hosting, and promotion costs. We do this because we know these stories bring people together.
They do.
They connect us to our past and to each other. If you want to support what we do here in a bigger way, head over to patreon.com/New England Legends. And just for $3 per month, you get early access to new episodes, plus bonus episodes that no one else gets to hear.
Yes, please help if you can. Okay, so Fairfield Hills Hospital, it's picturesque, isn't it?
It really is. It seems pretty busy, too.
Yeah.
Lots of cars around. I see a bunch of people going in and out of those buildings over there.
Yeah, well, today several of these buildings are town offices. That's the town hall in that one. There's an indoor sports complex over there, and then there's the school, but...
Wait a minute. A couple of these large buildings look absolutely frightening, Jeff.
Yeah, they do.
Clearly, they're abandoned. This big building next to us has a chain-link fence around it.
Now, when I was growing up here in the 1980s and 90s, this was still an active but, run-down mental hospital. There were a lot of patients still here, and some of the buildings had already been boarded up. But we used to play soccer on the fields right outside these buildings, and sometimes the patients would walk by and watch us.
Well, had you heard these buildings were haunted back then?
I think everyone in town had heard something about the haunted reputation.
Right.
We knew there were tunnels underground connecting some of these buildings, and if you're ever practicing soccer out here on a weeknight at dusk and it's quiet, you could hear the screams coming from inside the building.
Couldn't that have just been some of the patients?
Definitely, and I'm mostly sure it was some of the living patients, but man, it chilled you to the bone when you heard it.
I bet.
I mean, there was real anguish in those screams. And again, I'm only mostly sure it was the living patients, There's still a piece of me that wonders.
Well, way back in the year 2000, way back,
Yeah.
this hospital was on an episode of MTV's Fear.
Right,
Ed and Lorraine Warren were in that episode, remember?
That's right, yep.
I remember the show freaked me out.
Yeah.
What is it about these abandoned asylums that are always so damn scary?
Well, let's face it, atrocities took place inside these buildings. Patients were neglected and abused. Plus, some of the treatments that the people inside this place used to receive, they're absolutely barbaric by today's standards. And that haunts us.
All right, let's head back to the 1930s and set this up. It's June 21st, 1933, and Fairfield Hills Hospital has just opened to receive its first patients. Construction began almost 3 years ago, and now some of the buildings are ready for business. This is the state's third mental hospital. It was needed because the other two are already filled beyond their capacity.
Now, this hospital is not a welcome addition to Newtown. As you can imagine, a project this big and costly doesn't happen overnight. Newtown was selected years ago as the site, and the townsfolk, well, they're not happy. Could these patients be dangerous? What if they escape? What will it do to this quiet little rural town?
Still, hospitals like this are needed, and they have to go somewhere. And Newtown is it, like it or not. Dr. Roy Leak is the first superintendent of Fairfield Hills. And though he's had years of experience working at Connecticut State Hospital in Middletown, he seems to have learned nothing as far as community relations go.
Okay.
It's tough to open any kind of new facility in a town that doesn't want you and already doesn't like you. Dr. Leak is taken off guard on day one when he sees just how angry the locals are.
Still, it's too late now. I mean, the land's been purchased, patients are here, and more buildings are still under construction. And it turns out that community relations isn't the only thing that Dr. Leak is not good at.
All right, what do you mean by that?
Well, at this time, there are now 3 hospitals in Connecticut to treat the mentally ill. There's Norwich State Hospital, Connecticut State Hospital, which we mentioned before, and now Fairfield Hills. Fairfield Hills has been billed as not only the newest, but also the very best in treating people whose, quote, minds have become deranged with strange fancies and who have lost control over their thoughts and emotions. The other 2 state hospitals and their staff don't take kindly to being told they're inferior, so already there's tension within the state and very little communication between the 3 hospitals.
Which is a problem because Fairfield Hills is expected to take some patients from both of the other 2 hospitals.
Exactly.
There are 2 dormitories available for patients right now, Shelton and Greenwich houses. They're meant to hold 500 patients between the 2, and they're already filling fast. From here, we're going to leap forward just 1 year to June of 1934. It's been 1 year, and Shelton and Greenwich houses have been receiving a steady influx of patients from Norwich and Connecticut State hospitals. There's now 536 patients living in 2 buildings meant to hold only 500.
So in only 1 year, it's already overcrowded. In addition to the patients, there are 136 staff members, and that includes 4 physicians, 58 psychiatric attendants, including nurses, and 76 other employees, which would, of course, be like office staff, cooks, groundskeepers, maintenance, and all the other people you need to run a big operation like this. And by the end of year 2, the patient count has dropped to 495 thanks to some being discharged, but others dying.
Obviously, there's a big need for this hospital considering it's already at capacity, and they're doing their best to finish Kent and Canaan houses so that they can bring in more patients. And then there's the treatment the patients receive.
Right, the treatment. Now, by the late 1930s and early 1940s, electroshock therapy is in vogue in the psychiatric community. Doctors place electrodes on the temples of the patients with severe schizophrenia, depression, or other serious mental disorders, and then they deliver a shock to the temporal lobe. Now, the idea is to induce a seizure in the patient. The thought is that a seizure is almost like a reboot of the brain, and it may help reduce or even stop some of this extreme behavior.
But man, this treatment is tough to watch.
Yeah, it is.
Some of the patients look like they're in anguish.
And it gets worse. In November of 1941, a patient dies during electroshock therapy. The death was peculiar enough that an autopsy is ordered, and then it's discovered that the patient had actually died from being beaten to death. 5 employees are fired, 2 are convicted of manslaughter, and 1 of assault. But electroshock therapy isn't the only form of treatment that's tough to watch here.
No. Here in the 1940s, the use of restraints like straitjackets is also common for patients who are prone to hurting themselves and others. And given the population of the hospital is swelling and the staff have only limited resources, sometimes patients spend many hours in these restraints as their arms go numb from lack of circulation.
And there's also insulin coma therapy, where physicians deliberately place patients into a low blood sugar coma. The coma is supposed to provide the brain a reset and should only last 1 to 4 hours. But sometimes patients never pull out of these comas.
And in 1941 alone, there are 86 deaths at Fairfield Hills Hospital.
Oh, wow.
Some of these folks die from old age, others from illness, but then some are lost to suicide, accidents, and other dark causes.
In May of 1946, Dr. Bernard Brody begins performing frontal lobotomies on the most destructive patients. Within the next year, 107 lobotomies are performed. Now, some patients, they seem to improve. Others show no change at all, but 4 people die from complications of the surgery.
Man, this all sounds so terrible.
Look, no one wants to end up in an asylum, but for some people, this is the only place they can have any sort of quality of life. Some mental disorders are so extreme that people can't be cared for in a home setting. They need 24/7 care and supervision by trained medical staff.
Oh, that's for sure. But the problem arises as we keep moving forward in time. In 1949, the Fairfield Hills Hospital population peaks at 2,650 patients.
That's a lot.
Right. Now, at this level, it's a pretty tough environment. And to make matters worse, the hospital is now facing a staff turnover rate of 50%.
Oh, man. So basically, 1 out of 2 employees is resigning.
Yes.
Which means 2 things. First, this job is more than they can take. And 2, the job is more than they can take because the facility is understaffed and the patients are not receiving proper care. And seeing that up close can eat away at your own sanity and your own mental health. And suddenly, conditions go into a downward spiral.
Yes, and now we have patients who are already going through the torment of their mental health afflictions being underserved. Tensions build, and this place is like a powder keg. When a patient turns violent against another patient, the staff are short-handed already. A minor assault can turn into something much darker.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
And of course, the other option is to restrain or lock up those prone to violence for way too long, which only makes a bad situation worse.
By the late 1950s, the average number of deaths, at Fairfield Hills Hospital is 346 people per year.
Wow.
So that's basically one person every single day.
Life, for better or worse, continues here at Fairfield Hills. But then something happens in the United States in the 1970s and 1980s. The government puts forth the Deinstitutionalization Initiative, which begins to empty out hospitals like Fairfield Hills. Funds are cut further, staff are cut, the amount of patients that can be served are cut, until everything dwindles.
Buildings this large require a lot of upkeep, so the administration begins to shut them down, one by one. The unused buildings are locked up and emptied, and though they're empty and decaying like some corpse in the woods, they still seem to have a story to tell. And that brings us back to today. Ray, have you heard of the stone tape theory?
I actually read up on this one.
Okay.
The stone tape theory states that locations, especially those made of stone, can kind of psychically record events.
Okay.
And then other people can pick up on those events, almost like tuning into a radio station. Do you think that's what's happening here at Fairfield Hills?
It could be. My childhood and now the internet are filled with stories of people breaking into the old buildings and seeing apparitions or hearing screams in the distance. Sometimes, when you know the history of these places and you step inside and it's dark, it's quiet, and you can't help but tune into the emotions and the feelings of the people who once lived here.
Yeah, that just gave me chills. I mean, it must have been a horror show here at times.
Must have been. And the saddest part of this is that the story of Fairfield Hills Hospital is not unique by any means. This same story played out in asylums across the nation.
Okay, so where did all the patients go?
Well, some could be treated with better medicines and live on their own or with family. Some made their way into assisted living facilities, but many of them, sadly, now account for our homeless and prison populations. I mean, these folks had nowhere else to go.
Man, that's terrible.
It is, but at least the story of the buildings of Fairfield Hills have a somewhat happy ending. Now, by the time I was in high school, the few remaining buildings were shutting down for good. The town of Newtown purchased the property and its buildings from the state in 2007 and have since turned them into the town hall and a school and sports complex, and they still have plans for more development. The tunnels, they've all been filled in, and I can't imagine these remaining buildings will sit rotting all that much longer.
Well, that's good, but still, you have to wonder when it's dark and late at night if maybe you can still hear and experience a few echoes from this facility's troubled past.
Well, thanks for the trip down memory lane, Ray.
Of course. I can only imagine what it's like to live here in town with this imposing campus at the top of the hill.
This place does command attention, that's for sure. Hey, if you love stories of the strange in New England, be sure to subscribe to our weekly podcast. It's free, and you can do so on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your shows.
And we also love hearing from you.
We do.
Please post a review of our show, share our episodes on your social media, or stop a stranger on the street.
Be careful if you do that.
You can also call or text our Legend line anytime at 617-444-9683. Send us your feedback and ideas, or leave our show closing on there for us.
And just a reminder that the discussion about this episode continues in our New England Legends Extra, which you can only get at patreon.com/New England Legends. And our theme music is by John Judd.
Hi, this is Debbie from right here in Milford, Mass. Until next time, remember, the bizarre is closer than you think.